Hey Army, it's me, Taehyung. I've done so many interviews throughout my life as an artist. Usually, I can smile, answer questions, and move to the next schedule without thinking too much. But there was one day, one interview, that I can never forget. It wasn't because of the cameras or the questions or the reporters. It was because, for the first time, I let my real feelings escape in front of the whole world. That day, the lights were brighter than usual. I could hear the clicking of cameras, the rustling of papers, and the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. I remember sitting there waiting for my turn to speak. The questions started simple about our music, our journey, the usual. But then one reporter asked me something that made me freeze. Taehyung, what would you like to say to Si-hyuk PD님 today? It was such a simple question, yet it hit me harder than I expected. Because when I heard his name, it brought back everything, the memories, the struggles, the warmth, and even the moments I tried to forget. I looked down for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The air felt heavier. I could almost hear the silence between the flashes of the cameras. I've known Bang PD님 since the very beginning, since I was that kid who didn't even know how to stand confidently in front of others. He was the one who used to quietly walk into the practice room at midnight, look at me struggling with choreography, and simply say, "Don't lose your color, Taehyung. Your uniqueness is your strength." Those words became my compass. Every time I felt lost or compared myself to others, I remembered what he told me to never let the noise drown who I really am. But that day, in the middle of that press room, I realized how long it had been since I'd said anything back. And suddenly, I wanted to. My hands were shaking when I reached for the mic. The reporters leaned forward expecting another formal answer. But I couldn't say anything rehearsed. Instead, I spoke from somewhere deep inside me, from a place I hadn't touched in a long time. I said, "PD Nim, if you're watching this, I just want to thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." And as soon as I said that, I felt my throat tighten. My vision blurred a little. I tried to hold back my tears, but I couldn't. Because it wasn't just gratitude I was feeling, it was everything. The exhaustion, the memories, the love, the years that passed so fast. People often think we're always strong, that we know exactly what we're doing, that fame makes everything easier. But that's not true. Behind every stage, behind every perfect performance, there are nights when we question ourselves. Nights when we wonder if we're still the same people who started this journey. And that day, during that interview, I realized how much I missed hearing someone say, "It's okay to rest, it's okay to cry, it's okay to just be you." Because Bang PD님 was one of the few people who used to tell me that. The room went completely silent. Even the reporters stopped typing for a second, and I could feel my tears rolling down before I could hide them. I wasn't embarrassed though. For once, it didn't feel wrong to be vulnerable. It felt human. I think that's why people later said that moment went viral. But to me, it wasn't about going viral. It was about finally letting something out that had been buried inside me for years. Sometimes, when you hold too much in, it doesn't take much to break you. Just one simple question, and everything spills out. When the interview ended, I sat in the waiting room alone for a while. The staff didn't say anything. They just let me breathe, and I kept thinking how strange it is that the moments we try hardest to hold ourselves together are the moments when our hearts decide to speak on their own. That interview broke me, but maybe it also healed a part of me I didn't know was hurting. When the cameras stopped flashing and the reporters began to pack their things, I just sat there for a while, staring at the empty chair in front of me. The microphone was still on the table, but it felt like all the sound in the room had disappeared. My manager called my name quietly. "Tai, are you okay?" I nodded, but honestly, I wasn't sure what that word even meant at that moment. You see, there are moments in life when your heart feels too heavy to describe. It's not sadness, not happiness, just something in between. That's what I felt like. I had opened a door I had kept locked for a long time, and all the memories I had hidden behind it suddenly came rushing out. As I walked backstage, I passed a mirror. My reflection looked tired but peaceful. I could still see the faint redness around my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't look away. I smiled a little, even though it was shaky, because I realized that moment of weakness was actually strength. A staff member handed me a bottle of water and whispered, "Taehyung see, that was beautiful." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. I think people often forget that sincerity can be more powerful than perfection. You can rehearse every word, every gesture, but the truth has its own language. And that day, I spoke in that language without even meaning to. Later, when I got in the car, the silence hit me again. The city lights passed by outside the window, soft, distant like stars that didn't belong to me. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I could still hear my own voice replaying in my head. "PD Nim, thank you for believing in me." It's strange how words can echo louder after they've already been said. I started thinking about the first time I met him, how nervous I was during my audition, how I forgot the lyrics halfway through my song, and how I thought I'd already lost my chance, but he didn't scold me. He just smiled and said, "Even mistakes can sound beautiful if they're honest." That line stayed with me ever since. And maybe that's why I've always tried to be honest with my music, even when it meant showing my scars. Because honesty connects hearts in ways perfection never can. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat on the floor with the city glowing faintly through my window. I opened my phone, and the first thing I saw were clips from the interview. Hundreds of comments, messages, people saying they cried, that they felt the same way, that they understood me. Reading those messages made my chest tighten. It reminded me that even though I had been sitting alone in that room, I wasn't really alone. People were listening not to an idol, but to a person who was finally brave enough to speak with his heart. I think that's when I truly understood something. Fame can make you visible, but only truth makes you heard. That interview reminded me why I started singing in the first place. Not to be perfect, not to impress, but to connect. I texted Bang PD Nim that night. I wasn't sure if he'd seen the interview yet, so I just wrote something simple. "Thank you for always being my guide, even from afar." He replied after a few minutes, And his message was short, just one line. He said, I never doubted who you are, Taehyung. You just needed to see it too. When I read that, I felt something inside me unclench. A quiet peace settled in. Because maybe that's what healing feels like. Not a sudden burst of joy, but a soft exhale after holding your breath for too long. That night, before I went to sleep, I looked at the sky outside my window. Seoul was still awake, cars moving, lights blinking, but my world felt still. I whispered softly to myself, I'll remember today, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me that I'm still human. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized something beautiful, that sometimes the moments that break you are also the ones that bring you closer to yourself. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun was barely rising over Seoul, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gray. Normally, I'd stay in bed for a while, scrolling through messages or checking the schedule for the day. But that morning felt different. There was a strange silence in the room, not empty, but calm, like the world was giving me space to breathe. When I finally reached for my phone, the screen lit up with countless notifications, mentions, headlines, messages. Clips of me crying during the interview had already gone viral. My name was everywhere on Twitter, on YouTube, on every news site. People were writing things like Taehyung's emotional message to Bang PD님 made everyone cry. At first, I didn't know how to feel. Embarrassed, grateful, exposed. It was a mix of everything. I watched a short clip. Someone posted it, showed the exact moment my voice broke. I could see my hands trembling, the tears forming in my eyes, the way I tried to smile through it. It was strange watching myself like that, raw, unfiltered, completely open. For a second, I wanted to turn it off, but I didn't. Instead, I kept watching because that wasn't Taehyung of BTS on the screen, it was me. Just Kim Taehyung, a boy who once dreamed of singing his heart out and somehow grew into a man still trying to understand what that dream truly means. Later that day, I got a message from Jimin. He sent me a link to an article and wrote, Hyung, the whole world's talking about you again, but this time it's because they felt your heart. I smiled when I read that. He always knows how to make something heavy sound simple. Then Jungkook called me. He said, Hyung, I watched the interview. I cried too. And I laughed the real laugh, the kind that comes from deep in your chest. Because even though he's younger, he always understands me in ways few people do. Throughout the day, I read hundreds of comments from ARMY. Some said they'd been through the same feelings, being strong for too long until something small finally made them break. Others thanked me for showing that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to be real. And that's when I realized that interview wasn't just about me anymore. It had become something bigger, a reminder that vulnerability doesn't make us weak, it connects us. There's a strange power in showing your scars. You think people will judge you for them, but often they end up showing you theirs too. That's what ARMY did. They filled my feed with their own stories about heartbreak, about growth, about finding comfort in music. I read every message I could. Each word felt like a small light reaching out, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely surrounded by warmth. Later that evening, I went out for a walk. I wore a hoodie and a mask, hoping no one would recognize me. The city was busy, but in my mind, everything slowed down. The air was cold, the kind that stings your cheeks and makes you feel alive. As I walked past a cafe, I heard one of our songs playing softly inside Blue and Gray. It stopped me for a moment. That song had come from a place of confusion and emptiness in me, and hearing it that day reminded me of how far I'd come since then. I sat on a bench nearby and just watched people passing by, some laughing, some rushing, some lost in their phones. No one knew that the person sitting there, hidden under a hoodie, was silently thinking about how fragile yet beautiful life is. I realize how easily we forget that every person around us is fighting their own quiet battles. And that's what makes moments of connection so powerful, because they remind us that at the end of the day, we're all just trying to understand ourselves. I think that's what the interview did for me. It reminded me that behind all the applause, behind all the lights and stages, I'm still that boy from Daegu who just wanted to express what he felt. Music was never just about fame, it was my way of saying, this is who I am, even if it's messy, even if it hurts. That night, I wrote a short note in my phone's memo app. It said, never hide your heart even if it breaks on camera, because truth is timeless and so is sincerity. I didn't post it anywhere. It was just for me. Something to remember, a promise to never forget the feeling of that moment. Sometimes I wonder how many people saw that interview and thought, wow, he looks broken. But the truth is, I wasn't broken. I was becoming whole again. After the interview went viral, my schedule didn't stop. There were rehearsals, meetings, recording sessions. Life just moved forward as it always does. But something inside me had shifted. I started noticing things differently. The way people looked at me, the way they spoke to me, the way I carried myself when the camera turned on. Before that day, I thought being an artist meant learning how to be seen. Now I understand that being seen and being watched are two very different things. When people watch you, they see what's on the surface. They see your smile, your performance, your image. But when someone truly sees you, they feel the emotions you're carrying, even when you don't say a word. That interview reminded me that what people connect with isn't perfection. It's honesty, the cracks in your voice, the hesitation before you answer, the truth behind your smile. A few days later, I met Bang PD Nim again. It wasn't a planned meeting. I happened to be at Hype, and he was there too. He waved me into his office and smiled as if nothing had happened, but I could tell he had seen the video. He gestured for me to sit down, poured tea into 2 cups, and said, "You spoke beautifully that day, Taehyung." I lowered my head a little and laughed awkwardly. PD Nim, I didn't plan to cry like that, I said. He smiled and replied, sometimes the things we don't plan are the ones that reach people's hearts the most. We sat there quietly for a few moments. He asked how I'd been not as an artist, but as a person. It's strange how rarely people ask that. I told him I'd been reflecting a lot, that I'd realized how I'd been carrying the weight of always needing to be okay, even when I wasn't. He nodded and said something I'll never forget. He said, Taehyung, The reason people love your voice is because it sounds like it feels. Don't ever lose that. Those words stayed with me because they weren't about technique or performance, they were about emotion, about presence, and for the first time, I truly understood what he meant all those years ago when he told me not to lose my color. After that meeting, I went to the studio by myself. It was late, maybe close to midnight. The lights were dim, and the city outside the window looked like a sea of small stars. I sat down, turned on the mic, and just started humming. No lyrics, no melody, just a sound that came from somewhere inside. It felt raw, imperfect, but real. And it reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. I started writing a song that night, not for an album, not for anyone else, just for me. It was about that moment during the interview, the feeling of being both broken and whole at the same time. Every note felt like a conversation between me and the younger version of myself, the boy who used to dream in the practice room with tired eyes and a hopeful heart. I didn't realize it then, but that song became the start of something new for me. A new chapter 1 where I no longer sang to meet expectations, but to tell stories that mattered to me. Because when you experience something that touches your soul that deeply, you can't go back to creating just for applause. You start creating to connect. In the weeks that followed, fans continued to talk about that interview. Some said it made them cry, others said it helped them heal something inside themselves. I received letters from ARMY all over the world, handwritten notes, messages filled with love and gratitude. One message said, "Thank you, Taehyung, for reminding us that it's okay to not be okay." I remember reading that and tearing up again, because that's exactly what I had needed to hear myself. Sometimes I wonder if Bang PD님 knew what he was doing back then, when he encouraged me to just be honest, to not hide behind a mask. Maybe he did. Maybe he saw that the best version of me was never the one trying to be perfect, but the one brave enough to be real. Since that day, I've stopped worrying about whether my voice cracks during live shows or whether my emotions show too much when I sing. Because if my heart is sincere, then every imperfection becomes part of the beauty. I think that's what people felt during the interview. Not sadness, but sincerity. Not weakness, but truth. And that's what I want my music to carry from now on. A truth that can travel quietly from one heart to another, just like that moment traveled from mine to yours. Every time I step on stage now, I remind myself, don't perform the song, feel it. Because in the end, people don't remember how perfect your voice was. They remember how you made them feel. That interview broke me, yes, but it also taught me how to be whole, how to exist, not as a flawless image, but as a living, breathing person who still has a heart that trembles, a voice that shakes, and emotions that are real. After the noise faded, after the headlines stopped flashing my name, there was silence. A strange kind of silence, not empty but heavy. It's the kind that sits quietly in your chest, reminding you that something inside has changed. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the interview. It replayed in my head every night, the question, the tears, my voice trembling as I spoke to Bang PD님 through the cameras. I used to hate watching myself cry. It felt like weakness. But this time, when I look back, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt human. That realization hit me harder than I expected. Because in this industry, you learn to hide the human parts of yourself, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the fear that maybe you're not enough. We learn how to smile even when our hearts are breaking. But that day, for the first time in a long time, I didn't hide. And the world didn't turn away, it listened. That changed everything for me. I started journaling again. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, I'd sit by my window with a cup of tea and write about things I'd never said out loud. The people I missed, the memories that still hurt, the gratitude I never got to express. It became my therapy, my way of understanding who I was behind the lights. Sometimes I wrote letters I never sent to friends, to family, even to my younger self. One night, I wrote to Bang PD님 again. I didn't plan to give it to him, but I wanted to write it anyway. It said, "Thank you for teaching me that emotions aren't mistakes. You didn't just give me a career, you gave me a reason to keep believing in my voice." The next morning, I read it again and smiled. It wasn't just a message to him, it was also a message to myself. A reminder that vulnerability doesn't make you fragile, it makes you real. That honesty started bleeding into my music. I began writing lyrics that didn't just sound beautiful, they felt true. There were nights when I'd record alone, turn off all the lights, close my eyes, and just let the melody carry whatever I couldn't say in words. Sometimes I'd cry halfway through recording, but I never deleted those takes anymore. Because the rawness was the point, that was me. I also started having deeper conversations with the members. One night, after a long day, we sat together and talked about how much we'd grown not just as artists, but as people. I remember Jimin saying, "You looked like you were freeing something in that interview, Hyung." I smiled and said, "Maybe I was." We laughed, but there was truth in that. I had spent years learning how to perform perfectly, but that day taught me how to feel openly. When I read Army's messages after the interview, I realized something profound. People didn't connect because I cried, they connected because they saw themselves in that moment. We all have that one memory, a time when we said something honest and broke down in the process. And sometimes it takes breaking to finally breathe again. A fan once wrote, "Taehyung, you don't know me, but your tears made me forgive myself." That message sat with me for days because that's what art should do, not just entertain but heal. And if my tears helped even one person heal, then maybe it was all worth it. There were moments when I questioned whether I should have held it back, whether showing that side of me would make people worry. But Bang PD Nim told me later, artists aren't meant to be invincible, Taehyung. You showed strength in your softness. That sentence became a turning point because it reframed everything I thought I knew about strength. I began to see that real strength isn't about never falling apart, it's about letting yourself fall and still choosing to rise with grace. Every scar, every crack, every tremor in my voice became part of my story. And the more I accepted that, the freer I felt. In the months that followed, I noticed a subtle shift in how I approached everything. When I walked into the studio, I didn't think about what would sound popular. I thought about what sounded true. When I sang on stage, I didn't think about being perfect. I thought about being present. And when I spoke to fans, I didn't filter my emotions anymore. I let them see all of me, even the parts that were uncertain or afraid. That honesty started to change how people responded too. The energy at my fan meetings felt softer, warmer. It wasn't just idol and fan anymore. It was human to human. We shared stories, laughter, even tears. I realized that music isn't just about sound, it's about connection. And that connection only happens when you're brave enough to be real. Sometimes, before I go to sleep, I replay that interview one more time. Not because I want to relieve the pain, but because it reminds me of who I became through it. That version of me, vulnerable, trembling, honest, wasn't a mistake. He was me, finally unfiltered. That's the thing about moments that break you, they also rebuild you in ways you never expect. And though that interview left me shaken, it also gave me a gift, the courage to be myself even when the world is watching. Now, when people ask me what I learned from it all, I tell them this. Sometimes you have to lose the mask to find your voice. Because the moment I stopped trying to be perfect, I started to be real. And that more than anything is what makes every note, every tear, every word worth it. You know, fame is strange. It gives you everything you ever dreamed of, and at the same time, it quietly takes away the pieces of you that once felt simple. After that interview, after all the noise and the tears, I started to realize how much of my life had been spent under the bright light and how little time I'd given myself to exist in the dark. The dark isn't always a bad place. It's where you breathe without performance, where you listen to your own heartbeat, where you remember that you're human before you're an artist. I began spending more time alone, not out of sadness, but out of necessity. I'd go on long walks by the river at night. No cameras, no fans, just the sound of water brushing against the stones. That silence started to heal me. People often ask what healing feels like. For me, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fireworks or sudden peace. It was quiet. It was the slow realization that I didn't need to prove anything anymore. That I could just be Taehyung, not the performer, not the idol, but the boy who loves jazz, old movies, photography, and silence. Sometimes I'd sit with my guitar and play the same chord over and over again until I could feel my emotions settle into the sound. That's when I understood something Bang PD Nim once told me. Music doesn't heal the world by being loud, it heals by being honest. Maybe that's why I've always been drawn to the softer melodies, the kind that whisper instead of shout. They remind me of those quiet moments by the river where I could finally hear myself think again. There was one night when I found myself writing a letter, not to anyone else this time, but to myself. It said, Taehyung, you don't have to be everything for everyone. Just be enough for yourself. You've done enough. You are enough. I cried reading it, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I believed it. That belief changed the way I lived. I started saying no to things that drained me. I learned to take breaks without feeling guilty. I realized that stepping back doesn't mean stepping away, it means stepping into your own life again. And I wanted to live mine with intention. When I met Bang PD Nim again months later, he noticed the difference immediately. He said, "You look lighter." I smiled and said, "I think I finally learned how to breathe again." He nodded and said something that stayed with me. "Then maybe now you're ready to make music that breathes too." That's when I began working on songs that reflected where I was. Songs about peace, love, time, and the quiet beauty of being alive. I didn't care about charts or numbers anymore. I cared about emotion. I cared about whether my heart felt present in every lyric. During one of the studio nights, I listened back to a demo I'd made, a slow, soft track that felt like sunlight through curtains. And for the first time, I smiled, not because it sounded perfect, but because it sounded true. That's when I knew I wasn't chasing success anymore. I was chasing meaning. Even in my daily life, things started to change. I began reaching out to people more, friends, family, even old mentors. I wanted them to know how much they'd matter to me, how grateful I was even for the small moments we shared. Because you realize, after all the noise fades, that what stays with you isn't applause, it's connection. Sometimes I still think about that interview. The moment I broke down, the message I sent, the silence that followed, but I don't see it as a breakdown anymore. It was a breakthrough. It was the day I stopped pretending and started feeling. It was the day the artist and the person finally became one. Now, when I stand in front of a camera, I don't hide behind it. When I speak slowly with intent. When I sing, I don't worry if my voice cracks, because sometimes that's where the truth lives. And when I meet ARMY, I no longer try to be perfect. I just try to be present. Because being known isn't the same as being understood. And I think for the first time, I finally understand myself. And maybe that's what art is supposed to be. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Because the world doesn't need another flawless idol. It needs someone willing to stand in the light, look straight into the camera, and say with honesty, "I'm human too." Sometimes I think about how strange life is. One simple moment, one question, one tear can change everything. That interview was never planned to be emotional. I didn't walk in expecting to cry or to let the world see that side of me. But life doesn't follow scripts, it follows truth. And that day, truth came out in its rawest form. I used to believe strength meant keeping it all together, smiling even when it hurt, staying silent even when I wanted to scream. But now, I think real strength is found in the quiet moments when you finally let yourself be seen. When you stop pretending, stop performing, and simply exist as yourself. That's what that interview taught me. It wasn't about fame or headlines or how viral it became. It was about honesty. It was about the connection between hearts that don't need translation. Because pain, gratitude, and love, those are languages everyone understands. After everything, I realized something important. Vulnerability doesn't take away your power, it deepens it. When I let my walls fall, I didn't lose control. I found peace. I found clarity. I found myself again. And maybe that's what growing up means, learning that perfection isn't what makes you beautiful, truth does. To ARMY, I want to say thank you for listening, for understanding, for staying beside me through every season. You've seen me at my brightest and my darkest, and yet your love never changed. Every time I sing, every time I speak, I feel that love returning to me like a quiet echo. You've given me the courage to be real, to speak with my heart instead of my image. To everyone who's watched me grow, thank you for allowing me to be human. Thank you for understanding that beneath the stage lights, there's just a man who feels deeply, who learns slowly, and who loves completely. That interview didn't destroy me, it transformed me. It turned my fears into faith, my pain into peace, and my tears into truth. And now, when I look back, I don't see a boy breaking down in front of cameras. I see a man finally learning how to live with his whole heart open. So, if you're watching this, wherever you are, take a deep breath, forgive yourself, and remember, your softness is not your weakness. Your tears are not your failure. They are proof that you are alive, feeling, and real. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to be truly strong. Thank you for listening to my story. This was me, not BTS Taehyung, but just Taehyung. And I hope somehow my honesty found its way to your heart.